She pointed her phone at me, already on a call with 911, and screamed loud enough for the neighbors a mile down the road to hear. His trespassing. He broke into my family's ranch. I stood rooted to the spot, dust swirling around my scuffed boots, planted firmly on the land I had grown up on. This very soil was the same my father had toiled and bled on while building our life from the ground up. Karen, arms crossed defiantly, stood at the edge of my porch, sunglasses pushed low on her nose, tapping a notice of eviction against the wooden door. Her manicured nails were like tiny weapons, just as dangerous as the threats in her voice. "This property was sold to my cousin last week," she said, the smirk on her face widening, as if she held all the cards in a game I wasn't even playing. "So either leave quietly or deal with the police." I didn't budge. I didn't say a word. I just stared, because what she didn't know was that the ranch wasn't just mine. It had never been sold. The deed was safely locked away in a safe bolted to the floorboards beneath her feet, her moment of triumph built on a shaky foundation of lies. Behind her, two teenagers had their phones out, recording everything like it was some kind of show, whispering to each other, gleeful at the spectacle. "This is going viral." It felt absurd, as if they were waiting for a raccoon to snatch snacks from a picnic table instead of witnessing a man standing his ground against the theft of his legacy. Minutes ticked away, the oppressive heat hanging in the air, until we all heard the sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. "You better run," she hissed, her eyes sparkling with perverse joy. "You're about to get arrested on camera." I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned and walked back into the house, the floor creaking under my weight as I stepped inside. Because there was one thing Karen didn't bother to check before pulling this stunt. My last name was still carved into the metal gate at the entrance of the ranch. 3 sheriff's SUVs rolled up, the tires kicking up dust like warning shots. 2 deputies emerged, scanning the scene. One of them, a tall man with a solid build, approached me. I could sense Karen's confidence wavering as she adjusted her stand. "Sir," the deputy said, his hand resting casually on his belt as he looked between me and Karen. "We're going to need you to step outside and talk." From the porch, Karen folded her arms triumphantly. "He's done for. This is what happens when squatters think they can play landowner." I stepped out slowly, meeting the sheriff's steady gaze as he finally emerged from his vehicle. "Ro, how's your brother still running cattle up in Montana?" Recognition washed over the sheriff's face. "Well, I'll be. Caleb May is." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, we did ROC together in '03. You still owe me that beer from the poker game." Karen's smug expression turned to shock, her jaw dropping like a stone. The whispers ceased, the recording paused, even the dust stopped swirling for a moment. The sheriff took a step back, a grin splitting his face. "Caleb, it's good to see you. What's going on?" Ro asked, turning to Karen. His demeanor shifted, authority coming back to him. "You said he was squatting on his ranch." Karen blinked, her confusion evident. "What? No, that's not. He's lying. The deed was changed. I have a copy." Ro turned back to me. "You got your deed handy?" I smiled, a quiet confidence bubbling up. "Want to come inside and take a look?" I led Sheriff Ro into the house, leaving Karen stunned on the porch, her faux victory crumbling. Inside, I opened the floor panel with a small tug, punched in the code, and revealed the safe, handing the sheriff the thick folder inside, everything meticulously organized. The original deed, my father's signature, county registration with timestamps, and property tax receipts for the last 10 years. Ro glanced through them, quickly confirming their authenticity. "This is real, and it's untouched." Outside, I could hear Karen's panicked voice rising. "No way. He forged that. I saw the papers. My cousin showed me." Ro stepped back outside, the folder still in hand. "Karen, who filed the deed?" I don't remember the name," she stammered. "But it was done online or something. I have the screenshot." "That's not how property transfers work," Ro said sharply, tightening his jaw. "And impersonating ownership of someone else's land. That's how people go to jail." The other deputy joined in. "Do you realize the implications of this?" Karen backed up toward her car, her bravado faltering. "You can't arrest me over him. I was just trying to help my cousin." The sheriff remained firm. "Karen, I'm arresting you over the law, something you clearly don't understand." The cuffs clicked as they tightened around her wrists, sealing her fate. Just as her shrill screams erupted about fake veterans and deep state setups, the cruiser door swung shut. Her cousin stepped forward, voice trembling. "Man, we're sorry." She made it sound like you were just squatting here after it got sold. I nodded slowly, feeling a weariness settle in my bones. "That's the thing about truth," I murmured. "It doesn't matter how loudly you lie. It always shows up." Sheriff Rose stood beside me, arms folded, a smirk playing on his lips. "She picked the wrong vet to mess with." "Yeah," I replied, watching as the squad car disappeared down the gravel road, a weight of quiet settling over the land, heavier than the frantic shouting that had just transpired. After a moment, Karen's cousin awkwardly shuffled his feet in the date, breaking the silence. "We'll leave, and you won't hear from us again." I didn't reply, my gaze fixed on the distant ridge where my dad used to sit at sunset, contemplating the crack in our community that Karen had torn open. But as it turned out, this was only the beginning. 2 days later, a letter arrived, an official one, stamped and signed by the HOA board. The words burned into my mind as I read. "We have received notice of your unauthorized livestock expansion and will be issuing fines accordingly. If not corrected, your case may be escalated to county court." I couldn't help it. I laughed. I didn't even have an HOA. We were outside city limits, always had been. Fueled by irritation, I drove straight to the address listed on the letter. The location turned out to be a shabby office nestled in a rundown strip mall. Nobody was at the desk except for an old lady playing solitaire on her computer. "I'm here about this," I said, slapping the letter down in front of her. She barely looked up. "Name?" "Meyers." Her expression changed. She froze for a second before glancing up at me with wide eyes. "Oh, you're that one. The lady who got arrested," she said, voice low. I frowned, curiosity piquing my interest. "What do you mean?" "Karen," she replied, leaning in closer. "She's part of an unofficial HOA group. They try to take over unregulated land and force people into fake compliance. Fines, threats, phony notices. It's a scam they've been running for months." I stared at her, disbelief rippling through me. "And you're just letting it happen?" "Look," she shrugged, seemingly indifferent. "They pay rent on time, and technically, no one's caught them in court yet." I felt a fire ignite in my chest. They hadn't just targeted me. They were trying to steal entire neighborhoods, one forged letter at a time. That night, I buried myself in old archives, rummaging through tax records, zoning papers, old maps, anything that could prove the boundary lines and demonstrate how far this fake HOA had reached. By sunrise, I had a stack of documents 3 inches thick, but I didn't go to the sheriff yet. No, this required a different touch, a strategic approach. I needed Tessa, the woman who once ran a real estate fraud division before she was forced to retire early after exposing a developer who tried to bribe her. Now she was living off-grid, but I knew her reputation. She had made a county commissioner cry on live TV. She was the kind of woman who didn't back down. I knocked on her cabin door, heart racing with purpose. She swung the door open, coffee in one hand, a shotgun in the other. "Caleb Meyers," she exclaimed with a sly grin. "Heard you had a Karen infestation." Holding up the stack of papers, I said, "They are bigger than just one." Tessa invited me inside, gesturing toward a table littered with old blueprints and maps. With each sip of coffee and every document spread before us, we began connecting the dots. By the time the second pot brewed, she traced 5 similar complaints on a map, complaints rooted in similar language, the same threats, targeting people on private land without HOA jurisdiction. "They are running an organized scam," she said firmly. "Fake paperwork and real victims." Her eyes lit up as a plan began to form. "We can nail them, but we're going to need proof they're collecting money." I nodded slowly, recalling what Karen's cousin had mentioned about payments. He said they paid her to handle legal stuff. "I can bait them." Tessa leaned back in her chair, that devilish grin spreading across her face. Good, because once we catch them taking money for made-up fines. She wrote the word fraud on her legal pad. They're not just trespassing, they're going to prison. 2 days later, I made the call using a burner phone. Keeping my voice steady, I followed Tessa's instructions. I got a notice on my gate about unauthorized fencing. Says I owe $200 or I'll be reported to the county. The voice on the other end was smooth and too confident. Yes, sir. That would be from the Landowners Community Compliance Board. We handle rural property upkeep, and you're overdue. Feigning ignorance, I replied, I didn't know there was a board. Who do I pay? Karen, they said. She handles your file. Bingo. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning, with instructions to bring cash. No checks, no transfers, off-the-books convenience. They thought I was scared. They thought they had me. But I was prepared. I had 3 hidden cameras in my truck, a dash cam, one in the headrest, and another discreetly placed in the pen I'd be holding. Down the road, Tessa would be watching the feed with Sheriff Rowe. He had no idea just how deep this thing went. When the day arrived, I waited, adrenaline surging through my veins. Karen showed up right on time. As I expected, hair pulled tight, big sunglasses perched on her nose, folder in hand. Zero shame on her face as she approached. You will want to take care of this quickly, she said, handing me a fake invoice. We've already issued notices to 2 other properties. Next step is County Lynn. I glanced at the paper. It had an official-looking stamp, but the zip code was wrong, and so was the parcel ID. I pulled out the envelope of cash, and as I handed it over, she snatched it quickly. Is that it? I asked. Yep, she said, twirling on her heel and turning toward her car. But just as she was about to drive away, Sheriff Rowe's SUV lit up behind her, existential dread flashing across her face. Confusion was quickly replaced by panic as he stepped out, holding a copy of the footage streamed to his phone. Karen Bryant, he announced loudly, you are under arrest for fraud, impersonation of legal authority, and the unlawful collection of funds under a false organization. She froze, just like she had on my porch, but this time there was no triumph, only stunned silence as cuffs clicked around her wrists. As she was walked to the cruiser, a wild look crossed her eyes. You think this ends with me? She hissed, desperation flooding her voice. There's more. You don't even know who you're messing with. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I would take this fight to the very end. As Rowe and his deputies swept through the fake HOA office later that afternoon, Karen's arrest triggered a search warrant. Thanks to the evidence from our sting operation, they found 2 locked cabinets stuffed with files, over 80 names, handwritten notes, photos of properties, and recordings of gate codes. They weren't just bullies with clipboards. They were a network of thieves in business suits. By the next morning, headlines blared across the news. Illegal HOA scam busted in countywide sting. Reports flooded in as dozens of people began to share their stories, revealing just how deep the fraud ran. A week later, I received a call from a man named David, a retired Army veteran living 2 towns over. I thought I was alone, he said, a mix of relief and anger in his voice. I got fined $500 last month by the same group. You're not alone, I assured him, the adrenaline from the previous days still buzzing through me. And we're not staying quiet anymore. That night, as I sat on my porch with a drink in hand, the sun setting just like it always had, everything felt different, quieter, somehow more substantial. The land felt safe once again. My ranch was still mine, but now it also represented something bigger. It was about every family they tried to scare, every lie they printed, and every home they threatened. They had picked the wrong people to mess with, and now we were watching. They had awakened a fight that would ensure the truth would rise, no matter how loudly they shouted their falsehoods. The real battle had just begun. They had picked the wrong people to mess with, and now we were watching. They had awakened a fight that would ensure the truth would rise, no matter how loudly they shouted their falsehoods. The real battle had just begun. As the days turned into a week, The news continued to swirl around the fraudulent HOA like a late summer storm. People were speaking up, sharing their stories of intimidation and fear. Kids who had been filming Karen's antics now looked on her with revulsion, realizing how easily they had been pulled into her web of lies. I spent hours digging through old files at my desk, piecing together the stories I had gathered from neighbors who were equally affected. A retired couple had lost half their savings to false fines. A single mom with kids had been targeted for a notice of an unauthorized garden, while her house was clearly within county regulations. Each story fueled my fire, and my resolve solidified into something almost tangible, a righteous anger. As sunlight streamed through my office window, I received a call from Tessa. "Caleb, I think we need to meet. I've been going over the evidence we collected, and it's worse than we thought." My heart raced as I drove over to her cabin. The air was thick with purpose as I knocked on her door. She opened it, coffee in hand, her expression serious. "Come in. You need to see this." Once inside, she led me to a table cluttered with documents, maps, and photographs, the remnants of the investigation we were compiling. Karen was the face of the operation, but she's just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, Tessa explained, pointing toward a chart filled with names connected by red lines. "These people are organized, and they've got a network all over the county." I leaned closer, scrutinizing the connections. "What do we do with this?" "We have to expose them," Tessa replied, fire igniting in her eyes. "But this time, we can't just rely on the sheriff or the media. They're going to come after us. We have to be strategic." As she outlined her plan, I felt my blood thumping in my ears, excitement mixing with fear. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to gather testimonies," Tessa instructed. "Go door to door. Talk to everyone who's been targeted. No one is safe, but they need to know they are not alone. We're going to build a community of people who are willing to stand against this." Feeling invigorated, I nodded. "I'll start right away." Leaving her cabin, I made a list of homes I wanted to visit, families who had either fallen prey to the fake HOA or those I suspected had been. As I walked through the nearby neighborhoods, a mix of sprawling ranches and quaint farmhouses, anxiety coursed through me. But there was also a sense of purpose, a belief that we were on the verge of something monumental. The first house I stopped at belonged to the Johnsons, an elderly couple who had owned their property for nearly 4 decades. They had received a bogus fine regarding loud machinery, even though they hadn't used a single tool in days. Mrs. Johnson opened the door with a cautious expression. "Caleb, what brings you here?" she asked, her wrinkled hands clinging to the doorframe. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm here to talk about the HOA fines you received." She immediately glanced over her shoulder, as if scared of being overheard, before pulling me inside. "Oh dear, we've been so worried. Can you believe Karen would do this to us?" Sitting in their cozy living room, I listened as they recounted their experience. We were so confused. She was so authoritative, waving around paperwork that looked real. "It just seemed easier to pay the fine than to fight it," Mr. Johnson confessed, his voice trailing off. I took out my notebook. "I want to gather your story as evidence. You're not alone in this, and we want to fight back." Their eyes brightened with hope, and they nodded eagerly. We spent the next hour sharing information, their fears slowly transforming into resolve. By the time I left their house, I felt a flicker of something new. This wasn't just about my family's ranch anymore. It was a community effort to reclaim our dignity. Every house I visited echoed the same sentiments. Families were scared, but they were tired of being victimized. Word was already spreading about the group of imposters. Residents who had once accepted threats as a part of living in rural areas were now bonding over their shared anger. The collective rage was infectious, fueling our movement against Karen and her gang of fraudsters. As I returned home later that evening, I felt exhausted yet exhilarated. The air was thick with anticipation, a calm before a storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The fraudsters hadn't retreated. They'd only been momentarily delayed. The look on Karen's face echoed in my mind. She had threatened me, and now I was even more determined to see this through. Just when I needed a moment to think, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tessa. "I've got a lead." Meet me at the old barn on Miller's Road at 8 p.m. tonight. Bring your notes. My heart raced again. I glanced at my watch. I had just enough time to regroup before heading out. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting shadows that danced across the fields, I felt a surge of determination rise from deep within. Tonight, we would take the next step in uncovering the truth. Arriving at the old barn, I felt the weight of history around me. This place, once vibrant with life, had long been abandoned, now a perfect spot to plot our next move away from prying eyes. Tessa stood waiting, her expression a mixture of urgency and excitement. "Thanks for coming," she said quickly, motioning toward the dim interior of the barn. "I have something that could change everything." Inside, she laid out a series of photographs on an old, rickety table. These were taken on the outskirts of the community where the HOA is rumored to have had covert meetings. "Look closely." I leaned in, studying the images. They revealed a small group of individuals, some familiar faces mingling in the shadows, exchanging papers and cash in hidden corners. They are organizing. This isn't just a scam. It's a network of people trying to take over independent landowners, she explained. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision sharpening with focus. If we can prove that they are colluding, we can take it to the county board. We can dismantle their entire operation. Exactly. Tessa's eyes gleamed with excitement. But we need more than just photographs. We need witnesses willing to step forward, people who can testify about what they've seen and about the pressure they've faced. As we talked, I could feel a plan forming in my mind. This would require a daring approach, but I was willing to risk it all for the sake of saving our homes and our community. We needed a comprehensive list of everyone involved, their actions, and witnesses willing to come forward. "Let's create a town hall meeting," I suggested. "Let's gather everyone affected, give them a chance to voice their concerns and shed light on this deceit." Tessa grinned, tension breaking as she shook her head. "You really want to stir the pot, don't you?" "Absolutely," I replied. "The more people know about this, the less power they have. We'll invite law enforcement to be present and lay everything out on the table." As the night wore on, we hammered out the details: date, time, location, and strategy. We both felt it, a palpable energy like static in the air. This was our moment, the tipping point where we would take back our community. Driving home, adrenaline coursed through my veins. The stakes were high, but the thought of standing in front of my neighbors, rallying them together, filled me with fierce determination. The dawn of a new day would come, but for now, shadows lingered and battles loomed on the horizon. The war against deceit had begun, and with each passing moment, our fight grew stronger, united by purpose and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to be silenced. The war against deceit had begun, and with each passing moment, our fight grew stronger, united by purpose and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to be silenced. As the sun rose on the day of the town hall meeting, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. Tessa and I had spent the last few days gathering stories and finalizing the details. Residents of the community were buzzing with anticipation and curiosity, many of them ready to reclaim their voice. I arrived at the community center early to set up. Folding chairs lined the hall, some already filled with familiar faces, neighbors who had been scared and confused but were now rallying together. As people filtered in, the atmosphere shifted. Murmurs of determination replaced the previous whispers of fear. Tessa joined me, her eyes sharp and focused. "Ready?" I took a deep breath and nodded, scanning the crowd. "Let's bring them together." She moved to the front, and I followed, pulse quickening as I faced everyone. "Thank you all for coming," Tessa began, her voice steady yet impassioned. "We're here because we have been under siege. People are trying to take what is rightfully yours. We're not alone in this fight. It's time to take back our community." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fueled by the energy in the room, I stepped forward. "We've gathered stories from many of you, and this is just the beginning. We have evidence, proof that a fraudulent HOA is targeting our homes and livelihoods." A middle-aged woman stood up, her voice quivering. But what can we do? They are powerful. They've scared so many of us into silence. I glanced at Tessa, then back at the woman. That's exactly why we're here. We've already seen how they manipulate and intimidate. But now we have strength in numbers. If we stand together and share our experiences, we'll expose them for what they are. The crowd erupted into conversation, shifting between fear and hope. I could feel that desire to fight bubbling beneath the surface. As hands shot up around the room, I knew we were galvanizing a movement. An older man stood up, his voice booming with authority. We have to go to the sheriff and make our stand. There was agreement. People were nodding, growing louder, more animated. Let's confront them together, said another voice. Tessa and I exchanged nervous glances, but it was time to harness the energy of the moment. Let's make a plan, I urged. We can meet with Sheriff Rowe, bring our evidence, and demand that he investigate the full extent of this operation. As the ideas flowed, Tessa took charge of noting down names, contributions, and commitments. I could see it, the spark igniting a fire under everyone's feet. This wasn't just about an HOA or phony fines. It was about reclaiming our power as a community. Soon, we had a schedule worked out, weekly meetings at the community center, a plan to gather testimonies, and a plan to confront Karen's group head-on. By the time we wrapped up, it felt like we were on the cusp of something monumental. Hours later, as I drove home, I replayed the day in my mind. The rising excitement, the faces of residents who had glimpsed a way forward. But as I turned down my dirt road, my heart sank a little. We may have gained momentum, but I knew Karen would retaliate. The next morning came quickly, and with it, my phone buzzed incessantly. I glanced down to see a text from an unknown number. You will regret this. Back off, or you'll see consequences. My pulse quickened. They already knew. I responded with a calmness I didn't feel. We're not afraid of your lies. Moments later, another message lit up my screen. Fine. We'll see how brave you are when the chips are down. I set my jaw, determination solidifying. I wouldn't back down. If anything, I was more resolute. Time to share the threat. This wasn't just mine to carry. At our next meeting, I laid out the information for everyone, revealing the texts. Gasps filled the room. They can threaten us all they want, I said firmly. But we're stronger together. They're just trying to instill fear. It won't work. The energy in the room remained unwavering. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was all of us united, focused on the same goal. I could see the fear in some faces beginning to change, replaced with a fierce determination. Let's go to the sheriff together, I suggested. We're not backing down. We're taking the fight to them, showing them that we will not be intimidated. Momentum surged, voices rising as people nodded in agreement. Let's go, someone shouted, and a wave of energy rippled through the room. We would take the fight to them, together. That afternoon, we gathered at the sheriff's office, courage buoying us as we faced the imposing building. I could feel adrenaline buzzing through me as we formed a collective front on the steps. Sheriff Rose stepped outside, surprise flashing across his features as he saw the group of us standing there. What's going on? You all look serious. We're here to discuss the HOA and the recent threats we've received, I began, stepping forward. The sheriff nodded, eyes scanning the crowd filled with familiar faces now hardened with resolve. I understand. Let's go inside and discuss this. Once we were seated in his office, I laid out the events of the past few weeks, the fraudulent fines, the coercive tactics, and the threatening texts I had received. Tessa added information about Karen's group, the network they had established, and the evidence we'd gathered. Rowe listened intently, making notes and nodding in understanding. I had heard rumors, but this is serious. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. As the sheriff began outlining the steps he could take, I felt something shift. The tide was turning. We weren't just victims anymore. We were a force demanding justice. He assured us he would address the situation immediately and look into organizing a sting operation to gather concrete evidence against Karen and her accomplices. The murmurs of anger and resolve around me quickened. The fear that had once rooted so many of us now transformed into a unified front. We left the sheriff's office with a mixture of hope and determination. It wasn't all over, but we had taken an important step. The sun dipped low in the sky as we made our way back to the community center, ready once more to rally our neighbors and strategize our next steps. That evening, as I sat on my porch, I could see the peaceful fields around me, the sky overhead infusing the landscape with shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, a stark contrast to the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. I picked up my phone, a flurry of text messages coming through. People ready to join an effort, neighbors rallying for the fight. But all the while, I could sense Karen lurking in the shadows, plotting her next move against the awakening community. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. It was about to escalate, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The fight wasn't over. It was about to escalate, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Days turned into a blur of preparations, meetings, and whispered strategies. The community, once fractured by fear, was now a tightly knit group, fueled by an unwavering resolve to stand against Karen and her deceitful network. Tessa and I organized nightly strategy sessions that quickly morphed into impromptu rallies. Neighbors filled the community center, recounting their experiences and affirming their commitment. It felt electric, each voice adding more fuel to the fire, solidifying our collective goal, exposing the scammers and reclaiming our homes. Then came the day of the sting operation. Sheriff Rowe had finally mobilized, ready to execute the plan we had laid out. We had gathered everything: testimonies, evidence, and the names of those involved in the shadowy HOA. The word had spread through our network like wildfire, and the community was all hands on deck, ready for action. Tessa and I stood in my living room, pacing slightly as we waited for the sheriff's update. "This is it," she said, a mix of nervousness and excitement evident in her voice. "If this works, we'll have something they can't brush aside." "I can't help but think they'll see this coming," I replied, trying to quell the knots in my stomach. "What if they scatter or go into hiding? Then we'll continue to hunt them down." "We can't stop now," Tessa insisted, her resolve steadfast. "We're past the point of no return." The hours dragged on until finally, a text from Sheriff Rowe buzzed my phone. "We're ready. Meet us at Millersfield at dusk. Bring everyone." As the sun dipped low, casting an eerie glow across the landscape, our group gathered in the field. The air was thick with tension, excitement mingling with fear. I glanced at the faces of my neighbors, resolute and determined. This was it, the moment we'd all been waiting for. When Sheriff Rowe arrived, he quickly briefed us. "We'll be splitting into two groups. One will monitor the gathering spot, and the other will act as a decoy, luring out any potential collaborators." The sheriff's deputy, Officer Martinez, was in charge of ensuring the area was secure. As night fell, the stealthy glow of flashlights illuminated the faces around me. My heart raced with the anticipation of what was to come. We were stepping into uncertain territory, but there was no turning back now. In the distance, we could see headlights approaching. My stomach dropped. "This is it," I whispered, glancing at Tessa. The sheriff gestured for silence as we all crouched low behind the tall grass. I could see a cluster of cars parking near an abandoned barn, their engines humming softly in the night. It was them, the very people who had terrorized our community. One by one, figures emerged from the vehicles. Karen was at the center, flanked by a group of her loyal accomplices. My pulse quickened. I felt a flare of anger surge through me. This was the woman who had turned our lives upside down. Sheriff Rowe gave the signal, and as we slowly approached, I could hear snippets of their conversation. They were discussing the latest tactics, planning how to intimidate those who spoke up at our town meetings. "Listen, we can keep collecting fines as long as they stay afraid," Karen said, her voice oozing with confidence. "They've got no idea how deep this goes." At that moment, my heart raced not only from fear but from the empowering knowledge that we had gathered enough evidence to expose her. Sheriff Rowe's team sprang into action, lights flashing as they burst from their hiding spots. "Sheriff's Department, you're all under arrest for conspiracy and fraud." The commotion erupted as chaos ensued. Karen's group scattered, but our community surged forward, emboldened. We had come to confront the fear that had gripped us for far too long. Tessa and I joined the sheriff's team, documenting what we could, faces, names, anything that would solidify their illegal operations. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the field, a sweet victory ringing in the air. Karen, flushed and furious, glared daggers at me as she was led away. "This isn't over," she shouted defiantly, still holding onto her arrogance, even in defeat. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief wash over me. This was not just a confrontation. It was a declaration of independence for our community. We weren't willing to be victimized any longer. As the officers processed her group, Sheriff Rowe approached us, a proud smile on his face. "You did well," he said, giving us a nod of approval. "The evidence you've gathered will hold up in court." The crowd began to disperse, some neighbors hugging and celebrating victories under the moonlit sky. The weight of fear had started to lift, replaced by the thrill of accountability. That night, we gathered at the community center once more, this time for a celebration. Laughter filled the air as neighbors recounted the events of the evening, recounting stories of bravery, and new friendships formed out of adversity. As I stood there, watching my community come alive, I realized we had forged something powerful. We had seen darkness, but we had also uncovered light, the light of unity, strength, and an unyielding commitment to protect what was ours. No longer the prey, we had become defenders of our land and voices for the truth. And while there would always be challenges ahead, I knew we would face them together as one resilient community. The fight had indeed been just the beginning. With each passing day, we would stand vigilant against deception, bettering our lives through connection and cooperation. And in the heart of every individual there, a fire had been lit, one that would never again be extinguished.